There is a document sitting in the Kremlin archives. 47 articles, signed January 17, 2025, stamped with 20 years of commitment between Russia and Iran. It covers defense cooperation, cybersecurity, energy, technology, and peaceful nuclear collaboration. It was announced as the deepest formalization of Russian-Iranian ties since the 1979 revolution. What it does not contain, not in a single line across all 47 articles, is a mutual defense clause. That absence is no accident. And in the days since US and Israeli forces struck Tehran in the largest air campaign against Iran since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, that missing clause has defined everything about how Moscow has responded, loudly in public, silently in practice. Vladimir Putin issued his first formal statement on the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei through the Kremlin press service, addressing Iranian President Massoud Pazeshkian directly. He described the strikes as a cynical violation of international law and human morality, and called Khamenei an outstanding statesman who had personally shaped the development of Russian-Iranian relations over decades. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed that Moscow remained in continuous contact with Tehran and was closely monitoring the situation. Russia's foreign ministry had already condemned the US and Israeli operation the previous day, calling it a reckless and unprovoked act of armed aggression. But Peskov added a phrase that analysts have since flagged as telling. Russia, he said, must remain an island of stability, prudence, and wisdom, and must not be drawn into general chaos. That is not the language of a country mobilizing for war. That is the language of a country that has decided to watch. Former President and current Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev delivered a sharper set of statements, warning that a genuine nuclear exchange would make the 1945 bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki look minor. By comparison, he framed that as a deterrent, arguing that the United States understands the cost of a nuclear confrontation with Russia and will not risk one. He called Trump's decision to strike Iran a grave strategic mistake and described Europe's support for the operation as sycophancy. He dismissed the prior nuclear negotiations with Tehran as a facade, a diplomatic exercise that was never genuinely aimed at resolution. Most significantly, Medvedev predicted, not warned, that Iran would now pursue nuclear weapons with triple the energy it had before. He did not frame this as a danger. He framed it as a logical consequence of US policy. That distinction matters. What Medvedev did not announce was any Russian military response, deployment, or escalation. The nuclear rhetoric served as a ceiling, a signal about how far things must not go, while the ground floor, operational military support for Iran, remained empty. Khamenei is now the third Moscow-aligned leader, removed from power within 15 months. Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria collapsed in late 2024. Nicolas Maduro's administration in Venezuela fell shortly after. Now, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been killed in a joint strike on his own capital. Three governments that Russia spent decades cultivating through arms deals, energy agreements, and diplomatic cover. Russia intervened militarily to prevent none of them. The Iran case is particularly pointed given the nature of the relationship heading into the conflict. Russia intervened militarily to prevent none of them. The Iran case is particularly pointed given the nature of the relationship heading into the conflict. According to assessments from Western intelligence agencies and statements from Ukrainian officials, Tehran supplied Moscow with thousands of Shahed kamikaze drones during the war in Ukraine and assisted in constructing drone manufacturing facilities on Russian soil. Those weapons were used in strikes against Ukrainian cities. When Iran itself came under sustained aerial bombardment, no comparable support flowed in reverse. No Russian air defense assets were deployed over Tehran. No Russian military aircraft were scrambled. Iranian sources have indicated that practical assistance from Moscow during the crisis was minimal. The January 2025 partnership agreement between Putin and Pazeshkian was presented publicly as a new era in bilateral relations. The 47-article framework addressed nearly every dimension of the relationship: defense cooperation, counterterrorism, energy, finance, technology, cybersecurity, and civilian nuclear programs. But unlike Russia's treaties with North Korea and Belarus, both of which contain explicit mutual defense obligations requiring military assistance if either party is attacked, the Russia-Iran agreement includes no such clause. It commits both sides to cooperation against shared threats. It does not commit either side to collective defense. That distinction was made explicit in April 2025 when Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko appeared before the State Duma and confirmed directly, if Iran were attacked by the United States, Russia would not be legally or politically obligated to provide military assistance. That clarification came months before the strikes. Its timing, analysts note, appears less like routine legal disclosure and more like deliberate positioning. Russia's restraint has a financial dimension that is difficult to overlook. Russia is the world's second largest oil exporter. In the days before the strikes on Tehran were executed, crude oil prices were already rising on anticipation of regional disruption. Once the IRGC Navy issued a formal declaration over maritime VHF radio, cited by Reuters, prohibiting all vessels from crossing the Strait of Hormuz, the potential market impact became immediate. The strait is approximately 50 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. More than 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every day, over 20% of global daily consumption. Nearly a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas trade transits the same waters, the majority originating from Qatar. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have limited pipeline alternatives, but those routes are capable of handling only a fraction of normal volumes. Over 80% of oil and gas moving through Hormuz is bound for Asian markets. China alone accounts for more than 90% of Iran's oil exports. A sustained closure does not damage only Western economies. It creates pressure across every major importer globally. For Moscow, every week the strait remains contested is a week of elevated oil revenues, at a moment when Western sanctions have already forced Russia to redirect its energy exports toward Asian buyers. The Strait of Hormuz is not an untested flashpoint. During the Iran-Iraq tanker war of the 1980s, hundreds of commercial vessels were damaged or destroyed. In 1988, a U.S. Navy frigate struck an Iranian mine in the same waters. That same year, an American warship shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 civilians aboard. Tensions escalated significantly after the United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement in 2018. In 2024, Iranian forces seized a Portuguese-flagged container ship in the strait. Earlier this year, IRGC gunboats approached a U.S. flagged tanker in the same corridor. What is unfolding now is not a new crisis. It is the latest chapter of one that has been building for decades. President Trump addressed the nation and framed the operation across nearly 5 decades of conflict, citing the 1979 embassy hostage crisis, the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that killed 241 American service members, the USS Cole attack, Iranian-manufactured roadside bombs that killed and injured U.S. troops in Iraq, and the October 7th attack. He described the objective as the destruction of Iran's missile capabilities, the elimination of its naval forces, and the permanent prevention of Iranian nuclear weapons. But the address went beyond military objectives. Trump spoke directly to the Iranian people during a live national address in the middle of an active bombing campaign. He told IRGC forces to disarm immediately in exchange for full immunity, or face the consequences. He then stated he had 3 viable candidates in mind for who should lead Iran after the current government falls. No sitting American president has publicly named post-conflict leadership preferences for a country currently under U.S. bombardment. That framing signals an operation oriented toward regime change, not a contained military action. Moscow's position, stripped of its rhetoric, is now visible. Russia condemned the strikes. It mourned a strategic ally. Medvedev invoked the threat of nuclear catastrophe, and Russia deployed nothing, activated nothing, and sent nothing to Iran. The 20-year partnership signed 14 months ago does not require it to. Deputy Foreign Minister Rudenko confirmed that publicly in April, and Russia, still committed to its own military. Operation in Ukraine has no appetite for a second simultaneous theater of war. What Russia is watching, deliberately and patiently, is the United States extend its military commitments across another theater, draw down Pentagon inventories, absorb the financial costs of another open-ended operation with no clear exit, and drive global oil prices in Moscow's favor. The longer the conflict runs, the more Russia earns. The more Washington is consumed by the Middle East, the less pressure it applies in Europe. Medvedev's warnings of World War III are theater. What Russia is actually engineering is something far quieter, a strategic environment in which America is overextended. Iran eventually rebuilds under whatever government emerges, and Moscow collects wartime energy revenues while the bombs fall somewhere else. The missing clause in that 47-article treaty was not an oversight, it was the strategy.